Bill Browder is Vladimir Putin's #1 foreign enemy and CEO of the Hermitage Capital Management. Welcome to our program, Mr. Browder.
Great to be here.
I would like to begin with the recent developments. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said that the U.S. could impose military actions against Russia if Vladimir Putin doesn't settle the war. What is your take on such developments and the statements from the Trump administration, threats to Vladimir Putin?
Well, there is I would call it a mixed bag. On one hand, there have been some helpful, tough statements from the Trump administration. As you mentioned, J.D. Vance's discussion of troops on the ground or more sanctions. We also have President Trump issuing a Truth Social posting where he talked about taxes, tariffs, and sanctions if Putin didn't negotiate. That's one side. Then on the other side, we have President Trump having a 1.5-hour telephone conversation with Putin to discuss the supposed peace settlement. And then he just then called President Zelensky to inform him of what was said. That's not a negotiation. It's also not particularly helpful that Trump has talked about inviting Russia back into the G7, which was a statement he made yesterday. And it's also not helpful that he wants to go and meet Putin in Saudi Arabia to negotiate a peace deal in the absence of Ukraine. And so we're dealing with a lot of different conflicting pieces of information. It's very hard to know who we should believe, who we shouldn't believe. What's being said is policy or what they're just making up on the spot. But if I was a Ukrainian right now, I would be pretty upset. And as a sympathizer to Ukraine, I'm not very happy with the state of events.
From your perspective, what does President Trump is trying to do? Do you see this as a special technique for negotiations with Vladimir Putin?
Well, I don't see any special logic in the technique. So, for example, through his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, he started giving away territory of Ukraine. He made a commitment not to allow Ukraine into NATO. That's not a negotiating technique. If you're negotiating, you don't give away your position before the negotiation starts. And so I don't know what to make of it other than it's not helpful. I think it's puts Ukraine in a weaker position than it was before, and it's hard to know what's going to happen.
It's also interesting that today we have heard another statement from the Pete Hegseth, U.S. Secretary of Defense. He said that the U.S. could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine if Donald Trump decides to do so. Do you see this as an attempt from Trump's team to raise stakes and also to improve their own position after the recent yesterday's statement about Putin and NATO Ukraine?
It's hard for me to imagine this as a strategy. I imagine this is a reaction to the extremely negative reaction of all of America's allies to these confusing statements that were made over the last couple of days. I think that it's very difficult to read anything into what's happening because it just changes so radically from day to day. But when the future existence of your country is at stake, that must be very upsetting.
Also, I'd like to cover the readiness of Russian dictator Putin to negotiate with Trump. Recently, you said that Vladimir Putin is a psychopath and it's impossible to negotiate with him. From your perspective, is it possible to force psychopaths Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire?
Well, what I know that Putin likes to do is to make agreements that he then doesn't honor. He's been around for 25 years now. There's no mystery to Vladimir Putin. What does he do? He agrees to things, he lies in negotiations, and then he doesn't honor his commitments. And so I don't think that any promise from him serves any purpose whatsoever. It's very much a empty promise. He lies and he deceives and he goes against his commitments. And so there's no reason to believe he would be any different in the future than he was in the past.
But do you feel that Vladimir Putin can agree with this recent proposal on a ceasefire, for example, for at least some time to have a ceasefire in Ukraine?
Well, I think that he would agree to a ceasefire if the conditions put him in a position to subsequently break the ceasefire and carry on with his war. I mean, Putin is tired. Ukrainians are exhausted. Putin is tired. He's expended huge amounts of resources, people, money, equipment, and I think he probably wouldn't mind a short break to build up his resources again.
So you're confident that if there is a ceasefire, Vladimir Putin could agree with this deal just to regroup and attack Ukraine again in the future?
I think he's only going to agree to some deal if he gets a really good deal. And I think that he's also very much a man who likes to create a confusing process where it's hard to respond to what he's saying. And so it looks like there's a negotiation going on, but there isn't really a negotiation.
So you don't expect Vladimir Putin to make any kind of concessions to Ukraine and the United States?
No, absolutely not.
He will not do this because that's how he behaves.
Putin is a guy who doesn't negotiate. He doesn't compromise. He only pushes hard. And he doesn't mind exposing his own people to pain because he's not a democratically elected leader. He's a dictator. And so it doesn't matter to him. His credibility doesn't matter to him. Nothing really matters to him other than basically being the strong man and being seen to be strong.
Also, according to Bloomberg, Vladimir Putin is forming his special team for negotiations with the American administration. From your perspective, do you feel that this team could play any kind of a role in the decision-making process in Kremlin, or only Vladimir Putin is the guy who makes all the decisions?
No, he doesn't delegate to anybody. He's a decision maker in all decisions. So whoever he's sending out will, basically just figure out what's on the table and then report back to him, and then he can play around and see if there's any area where he can negotiate.
Trump is it seems like he's really confident that sanctions, tariffs, and decrease of global oil prices could really force Putin to negotiate a ceasefire. How harmful could be for Russia's economy such decisions if such decisions would be implemented by U.S. president?
Well, if the sanctions, tariffs, taxes, etc., were to seriously dent the oil revenue, then it could have an impact.
Do you feel that Trump has ability to make a decrease in oil prices worldwide around the globe?
No, not in the short term. In the medium term, policy can change oil prices. In the short term, I don't think that's the case. But he can also be effective in cutting off Russia's ability to export their oil, either through through sanctions on shipping companies and sanctions on ports and other types of things like that.
But it would take a time to decrease global oil prices. I
think so, yeah, absolutely.
And how many time it could take from your years, months, or if there is a
years. I mean, it's a very long process to increase. Now, the oil price could change on its own very drastically if there's a recession or China has a economic problem of some significance. These are the types of things that could push the oil price in the short term. But otherwise, you need to invest in an oil well, and then that oil well needs to start pumping, and then you need to start exporting that oil, and that has to add on to all the other oil, and then the price of oil goes down.
Also, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also says that Vladimir Putin is only pretending that he would like to have a deal, but he just tell Trump what he would like to hear. Do you agree with President Zelensky with this assessment?
Well, I think that it's slightly different than that. I think that Putin needs to have the war in place in order to stay in power. He needs to look like the strong man. And he's very upset with the losses that he's experienced and the humiliating way in which his soldiers have conducted themselves on the battlefield. But at the same time, he's not the one experiencing the pain. It's his people, and he's not in a democratic country where you can get, it's not like there's a voter electorate that will kick you out. He's very much in a position where he can experience really extreme pain for a long time without any problem.
So he just continues his war because he does not suffer himself.
Correct. And any other head of state couldn't have even achieved, or I should say, experienced 1/100th of the losses that he's experienced. In a normal situation, the people would get upset in the country, and that would be the end of that. But in Putin, there's no people to get upset.
But how Western allies and Ukraine together can inflict pain directly on Vladimir Putin? You mean like physically or other means?
Well, I think the main thing to do is to continue to wear the Russian military out, to destroy the oil refineries, as they've been doing, to get more sanctions in place, to go after the oil, to sanction the oil companies, sanction the buyers of the Russian oil, that type of thing.
What is your take on security guarantees for Ukraine? Lots of discussions about the European peacekeeping forces could be deployed to the front lines. Can you imagine such scenario?
It's completely unimaginable. I mean, I can imagine them putting peacekeepers in place, but what do the peacekeepers do when Russia starts attacking? Do they fight back? So if you have a bunch of international peacekeepers, are they going to fight back and engage in a war with Russia, or do they just don't do anything?
And also Pete Hegseth ruled out deploying American troops on the ground. Do you feel that without American military presence, this mission could not be credible?
Well, I mean, look, the Ukrainian military has deflected a major invasion from Russia, and Ukraine wasn't known, 3 years ago to be some kind of world power. I mean, I think that anybody with enough resources can fight off Russia, and I think that if Europe was involved, I think that Russia would have a hard time with or without America.
Let's cover also the state of Vladimir Putin's grip on power. How can you assess the current situation in the Kremlin? Reuters reported that Russian allies are not really happy about the war because of sanctions, but how can you assess the state of Putin's grip on power?
He's got a firm grip on power. I mean, people are angry, people are badly affected. It's not a good situation, but it doesn't matter what people feel like in Russia because Putin will arrest, torture, and kill anybody who stands in his way. And so it's not public opinion doesn't matter. And he's very conscious of any attempted coups or anything like that because he's looking out for, disloyalty.